My grandfather was a prolific Hollywood composer. He built a terrific and serene lifestyle in Sierra Madre, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. My grandparents both came from tragic circumstances a bit, but their kids had very bright blue sky futures. They had enough money to rent a beautiful house. They had a horse. They had a cook. They could go out for special meals at Musso and Frank's in Hollywood. Everything was looking great. And then that day happened. My uncle had a love for speed, a need for speed. He'd jump off piers. He'd ride bikes off roofs. He loved getting under the skin of uptight people. He kind of had a wanted poster of him in Sierra Madre, and he loved it. This was fun. It wasn't malicious, but it was unforgettable. He broke his neck and almost decapitated himself on a rainy day in Pasadena in 1940. He was rushed to LA County General Hospital, where the doctors thought they were just merely preserving him a few days. They thought they were just keeping him kind of alive so people could say goodbye. The family could organize a funeral, bring the minister in to say last rites. He had such incredible grit and tenacity and will that his will was stronger than the infections and stronger than the complications of spinal cord injury. He knew how hopeless and how doomed people thought he was, and it was like a narcotic. It was like oxygen to him. He was a natural-born contrarian. He loved to hear no so he could say yes. And the main thing my uncle wanted to do, because now he's getting older, is he wanted to drink. And he wanted to smoke cigarettes, and he wanted to flirt with girls, and they would surround his bed, and they would have the loudest, noisiest, kind of debaucherous teenage parties. Eventually, after enough boozing and craziness and tears, after my grandfather died, said, enough. I'm tired of taking handouts. I'm not here just to fade away into the mattress. I'm here to do something with my life. That's why I survived. There is something beautiful about knowing that you're not going to have a long lifespan. So, to him, every minute that he got out of that hospital after he got hurt was icing on the cake, a joyride, and he got this idea of taking his father's music and started pitching Hollywood, especially early TV, which was desperate for soundtracks and music. The problem was at first, he didn't want people to come and see him because he had a frightening appearance because of his accident. He was in bed. It wasn't your typical Hollywood, handsome, striding, virile guy, right? There was a little guy in a chair or tucked into a day bed with a throw blanket over him. And he could convince almost anybody to give his music catalog a tryout. One of the first film people that bought his stuff was a guy named Ed Wood Jr., who was filming a movie called Plan 9 from Outer Space. But Ed Wood and he were sort of misfits on the edge of Hollywood in Day of the Locust tradition, and they were a match together. Ed Wood illuminated my uncle to the idea that there was a great market to work on science fiction movies. And my uncle went on to do a ton of science fiction. First Spaceship on Venus, Women of the Prehistoric Planet, my favorite, Navy versus the Night Monsters. Americans fell in love with outer space. There was an escapist mentality to draw their attention away from the brutal reality of nuclear war possibly coming. The most prestigious and accomplished producer Gordon ever provided post-production services to was a guy named Ivan Torres, and he was the brains behind Gentle Ben, Flipper, and Doctari. They both had somewhat of a jaded, disenchanted view of Hollywood. I've asked myself over the years, what was it like for my uncle to be in a wheelchair as a quadriplegic in the most vain, beauty-worshipping city on the face of the earth? It must have been a little bit like being like a Martian in Walmart. But it was all about not frowning and all about not worrying what other people thought about him and all about projecting confidence. He needed his friends' help and manpower and elbow grease and their ability to go into Hollywood and talk to studio people and union people. His mother would have to push him into the executive suite at NBC. And can you imagine some suit looking at my uncle thinking, what could this kid possibly do? But my uncle, because he was on his butt all day, he had a lot of time to think. He had a lot of time to dream. He wasn't chasing women or, working out at the club because he couldn't do it. One of the things that attracted me about Gordon as a character was his indifference about being in a wheelchair, about being a quadriplegic, about being dependent on other people to go to the bathroom, eat, light a cigarette. The last things I remember is being dragged into his hospital room when he was dying, and he wanted to try to end on a friendly note for me, and all I wanted to do is escape the room. Boy, did I change my mind when I later came to find out what a miraculous human being he was. Gordon had done the impossible. He's actually in a medical journal for being such an unlikely person to have lived so long with such a bad spinal cord injury. You know, my uncle the guinea pig. He seemed both fragile and unkillable. But in the 1970s, what started off as skin cancer metastasized and got into his colon and that area. He was scrambling to do anything. I think he knew his time was winding down. You know, in the end, you know, I find this incredibly heroic. You know, one of the things he wanted to do, one of the dreams he has, he wanted to water ski. And he had this idea for building like a hydroplane where there would be like a surfboard with a chair bracketed on top. As he started knowing he was dying, he really investigated whether he could do this. He called his insurance company and said, am I covered if I die doing this? Because I think he really wanted to have a much more spectacular death than dying of cancer. You know, he'd rather die in an airplane crash or get eaten by a Kenyan lion. You know, and the insurance people, being insurance people, said, no, we will not cover you if you die of such a preventable death. And so he gave up that dream. He eventually was going in for radiation treatment. It was making him sick as a dog. And then one day, back, you know, at the hospital where I visited him as a kid that didn't want to be around him, he said, that's it. I'm not doing any more radiation treatment. Just let me go off to my next phase in life, you know. But first, you know, I want to have some fun. And the day before he died, my aunt, his wife, organized this really loud, boisterous party. His last night alive was having a good time with the people that he loved. And, you know, it was a great way to go out. And, you know, I miss the guy. What can I say? I don't want to get teary up, but, you know, I miss him deeply. And, you know, I've been asked in interviews, what's the first thing you're going to do when you see him in heaven? And I say, duck, because I'm afraid he's going to take a swing at me for trying to exploit his story. But I love him dearly. And I wouldn't have said that when I was a pallbearer at his funeral and we almost lost the grip on his casket and it went sliding down the hill. Now I can see that was really the joyride mentality of Gordon, wanting for speed. You know, and so when he did depart this world, you know, he got his old legs back, and that's not too bad.